By dawn, 7 royal hunters lay dead in the snow, and the woman who had killed them stood barefoot in their blood, with a silver arrow still buried in her shoulder. This is the story of Elara Vey, a rogue she-wolf hunted for a crime she never confessed to, and Kaelin Thorne, the Alpha King who ordered her dragged to his palace, not because he wanted her punished, but because he needed to know why she had spared the last hunter. At the heart of their story was not destiny, prophecy, or noble blood, but the dangerous question of what happens when a woman who has survived by trusting no one is brought before a king who has forgotten how to trust himself. The kingdom called her a beast before it ever learned her name. But beasts do not stand between arrows and children. And kings, Elara would soon learn, do not always know what is being done in their name. The ravine was quiet, except for the wind dragging itself through the pines. Blood steamed dark against the snow. Broken bows lay half-buried beneath torn cloaks, and the bodies of the royal hunters were scattered where they had fallen, not butchered, not mocked, only stopped. Elara stood in the middle of them, with one hand pressed to her shoulder, her fingers slick around the shaft of the silver arrow. Her breath came unevenly, but her spine stayed straight. Across from her, the last hunter alive held a shaking blade that had already lowered toward the ground. He was young, too young to hide fear well. His name, stitched in black thread on the inside of his collar, was Merrick. Elara's golden eyes flicked to the sword in his hand, then to the narrow crack in the rock behind her, where a child's muffled breathing trembled in the shadows. "Pick it up properly, or put it down," she said. Merrick swallowed. "You killed them?" "Yes. They were royal men." "They were men when they entered this ravine." Her voice was hoarse, almost calm. "They stopped being men when they aimed at the child." His eyes jerked toward the rocks. Shame moved across his face before he could bury it. "We had orders to kill rogues." "That boy is 6. He carries rogue blood." Elara stepped forward, slow enough that he could have raised his blade. He didn't. Blood does not hold a knife. Blood does not choose cruelty. Men do. Merrick's lips parted, but no answer came. Snow gathered in his lashes. Elara looked at him for a long moment, and then she turned her back on him. It was not mercy born of softness. It was judgment. "You live because you hesitated," she said. "Remember that when they ask why you are the only one breathing." By midday, Merrick was on his knees in the palace war chamber, still wearing the blood of the ravine. Around him, generals and captains stood beneath black banners sewn with the silver wolf of Thorn. Their voices struck the stone walls like thrown spears. "Execution," General Varick said. "Public. Immediate. She slaughtered royal hunters. A rogue who kills 7 of the king's men cannot be allowed to draw another breath." At the head of the chamber, Kaelin Thorne said nothing. The Alpha King sat with one hand resting against the carved arm of his chair, his face unreadable beneath the cold light of the high windows. He was not an old king, but grief had put something ancient behind his eyes. When he finally spoke, every voice died. "Did she ambush them?" Merrick lifted his head. "No, Your Majesty." Varick snapped. "Boy, think carefully." Kaelin's gaze did not leave Merrick. "Answer me." "They cornered her in the ravine," Merrick said. "There was a child with her, hidden. One of the men saw him move." The room tightened. "And?" Kaelin asked. Merrick's throat worked. "And Captain Orlin ordered us to fire." "At her?" "At both." Silence spread through the chamber, slow and poisonous. Kaelin leaned forward. Could she have killed you? Merrick looked down at his hands. They had not stopped trembling. Yes. Why didn't she? Because I lowered my weapon. He forced himself to meet the king's eyes. She said I was still a man. Something shifted in Kaelin's face. Not softness, not doubt exactly, but a crack in an old certainty. General Varric stepped forward. Your Majesty, rogues lie. They corrupt. If we allow sentiment to enter judgment, enough! Kaelin rose, and the authority in him filled the room before his voice did. Bring her to my palace, alive. If any man touches her without cause, he answers to me. No one moved for half a breath. Then every soldier in the chamber bowed, though some did it with clenched jaws. Far from the palace, Elara had already dragged herself through 2 miles of frozen forest with the rescued child clinging to her torn cloak. His name was Tomas, and he had not spoken since the first arrow flew. At the door of an old healer's hut buried beneath pine branches, Elara crouched in front of him and took his small hands in hers. Listen to me, she whispered. You stay with Mara. You do not run, no matter what you hear. The healer, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, looked at the blood soaking Elara's sleeve. You cannot keep standing like this. Elara glanced back toward the trees. Wolves were moving in the distance. Organized. Royal. I don't have to keep standing long. Tomas grabbed her wrist. Don't go. For the first time, pain crossed her face in a way the arrow had not caused. She pressed her forehead to his. If they find you, they kill you. If they follow me, they don't. They'll hurt you. They can try. She pried his fingers loose gently, gave him to Mara, and walked back into the snow before the child could see her stumble. The second hunting party found her in an open field at dusk, exactly where she meant them to. She did not run until she was sure every hound had caught her scent. She led them over ice, through thorn and creek, away from the healer's hut, away from Tomas, until blood loss finally dropped her to one knee. Even then, 3 men kept their distance. They had heard what happened in the ravine. When chains closed around her wrists, Elara looked at the captain and smiled without warmth. Careful, she said. I bite when frightened men get brave. By nightfall, she was dragged into the great hall of Thorn Palace, barefoot, chained, and still refusing to bow. Courtiers gathered like carrion dressed in silk. Kaelin stood at the foot of the throne, not above her, not seated, but waiting. His eyes went first to the silver arrow still buried in her shoulder, then to the bruises on her wrists, then to her face. Why did you kill my hunters? He asked. Elara's chain scraped the marble as she lifted her chin. Because your hunters stopped being men the moment they aimed at a child. The hall fell so silent that even the torches seemed to still. Kaelin did not look away. In her voice, he heard no plea for mercy, no performance of innocence, no fear of death, only a truth sharpened by pain. And for the first time in years, the Alpha King wondered what else had been done beneath his banner while he called it law. The king had brought her to the palace to judge her, but by nightfall, it was his own kingdom that had begun to stand trial. By dawn, the palace had already decided what Elara was: a beast, a murderer, a border-born stain dragged too close to royal blood. So when Kaelin ordered her taken not to the black cells beneath the western tower, but to a guarded chamber with a fire, clean water, and a healer, the court swallowed its outrage in public and spat it out in whispers behind carved doors. Elara heard enough of it through the stone walls to understand. Mercy, in a palace, was not kindness. It was politics people had not yet learned how to use. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed while the healer cut the broken arrow from her shoulder. Her jaw locked so tightly that blood welled where her teeth pressed into her lip. Captain Soren stood by the door with 2 guards, one hand resting on his sword, though his eyes kept drifting to the torn skin at her wrists. "If you mean to stare," Elara said without looking at him, "at least have the courage to ask what you want to know." Soren's mouth tightened. "I want to know how one woman tore through 12 trained hunters. They were trained to chase the hungry," she said, "not to face someone who had nothing left to lose." The door opened before he could answer. Kaelin entered without his crown. That somehow made him more dangerous. No gold to soften the authority in him, no ceremony to hide behind. Just the man, broad-shouldered and silent, with winter-gray eyes that seemed to weigh every breath in the room. "Leave us," he said. Soren hesitated. "My king, stay outside the door." Soren obeyed, but not before giving Elara one last measuring glance. When the door closed, Kaelin stood across from her, close enough for her to see the faint scar along his knuckles, far enough to remind her that distance was also a form of power. "I need the full truth," he said. Elara laughed once, softly, without humor. "No, you need a story that fits your throne." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "You killed royal hunters, and they killed before I reached them. Names," he said. "Places, witnesses. Give me something I can act on." She turned her head toward the fire. For a moment, the orange light softened the hard line of her face, and she looked less like a prisoner than a woman trying not to remember a room full of ghosts. "Men like you do not want truth. You want a version of it that lets you sleep." Kaelin stepped closer. "You know nothing about my sleep." "I know your crest was burned into the doors of my pack house," she said, and the room seemed to contract around the words. "I know your hunters came to Blackpine in the first snow and accused us of sheltering rogues. We had 2 old men, 3 widows, and children with ribs showing through their shirts. If rogues passed through, it was because no one survives winter at the border without passing through somewhere." Her fingers curled around the blanket beneath her. "They found nothing. No weapons, no raiding maps, no stolen royal coin. So they burned our winter stores to teach us obedience." Kaelin's face went still. Not cold. Worse. Attentive. "Who gave that order?" "The man with your wolf on his cloak." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one we were left with." Her voice lowered. 4 children died before the thaw. Not in battle. Not with honor. They died slowly. Under blankets their mothers warmed with their own bodies, because your law wanted to make an example of us. Silence spread between them, heavy and breathing. Then Kaelin asked, quieter, "And after?" Elara looked back at him. "After, I stole. I ran with people your court would call criminals. I broke traps, emptied storehouses, put knives to throats. And yes, I killed men who came hunting us. I am not clean, King Kaelin. Do not make that mistake. But I remember every life I took. I carry them. Can your hunters say the same?" He had no answer that would not shame him. Later that day, in the council chamber, Kaelin stood over maps and sealed orders, while Lord Varric, his uncle and chief advisor, watched with the patience of a man who had long ago learned how to turn concern into control. The hunting party's route had crossed 3 ridgelines beyond the authorized boundary. Their written command bore no mark from Kaelin's hand, only the heavy black seal of Varric's office. "You sent them beyond my order," Kaelin said. Varric folded his hands over the head of his cane. "I protected what your order did not reach. You burned stores in Blackpine. I denied supplies to traders. Children died." For the first time, Varric's mask shifted, not with guilt, but irritation. Children die when their elders make foolish loyalties. Kaelin's growl was low enough to make the guards at the wall lower their eyes. Varric leaned closer. Mercy toward rogues weakens the crown. Mercy toward those who shelter them invites rot into the bone. A king who doubts his own teeth invites the wolves to eat him. Kaelin held his uncle's gaze. And a king who lets another man bite in his name is no king at all. That evening, Queen Mother Isolde came to Elara's chamber, dressed in mourning black, though no funeral had been called. She dismissed the guards with a glance and studied the prisoner as one might study a blade left on a child's pillow. "You have caused unrest," Isolde said. Elara stood, despite the pain in her shoulder. "No, I survived it. That seems to trouble people more." Isolde's eyes narrowed slightly. "Most prisoners tremble when I enter. Do you prefer that?" "I prefer honesty." Elara smiled faintly. "Then I am afraid every day. I simply stopped letting fear choose for me." Something moved across Isolde's face, quick and unreadable. Not approval. Not pity. Recognition, perhaps, buried so deep she would never name it aloud. "My son is not a cruel man," she said. "Cruel men rarely need to be," Elara replied. "They have loyal ones to do it for them." Isolde left without another word. Near midnight, a servant girl entered with a pitcher and shaking hands. She could not have been more than 16. When she saw Elara awake, the pitcher slipped, water shattering across the floor. The girl went white. "Please, my lady, please don't tell them. They'll send me back to the kitchens. I can't lose this post." Elara rose slowly, wincing, and took the broken handle from the girl's trembling fingers. "What is your name?" "Mara." "Mara, breathe." "I'm sorry." "I know." Elara tore a strip from the sheet and pressed it into the girl's palm where the ceramic had cut her. "If anyone asks, I knocked it over." The girl stared at her. "But why would you help me?" Elara glanced toward the door, where Kaelin stood unseen in the shadowed hall, his hand frozen inches from the latch. "Because fear makes terrible servants of us all," she said softly. "And someone should have told me that when I was your age." Kaelin did not enter. He remained in the corridor long after Mara hurried away, listening to the quiet scrape of Elara gathering broken pieces from the floor with one wounded hand. The woman his court called savage had every reason to hate his walls, his name, his crown. Yet she had protected a frightened girl who held no power at all, and in that small, unguarded mercy, Kaelin saw something no report had given him. Her defiance was not hatred of order. It was hatred of cruelty disguised as order. The more Kaelin listened to the woman everyone called savage, the harder it became to ignore the savagery wearing his own crest. The palace did not sleep that night. It only pretended to. Behind its carved doors and polished stone, whispers moved like mice, slipping under thresholds, climbing stairwells, carrying Elara's name from servant to soldier to noble mouth. By dawn, the story had already changed shape. Some said she had bewitched the maid. Some said she was waiting for the right moment to tear the king's throat open. And some, very quietly, said perhaps the king had brought a wounded woman into his palace because he had begun to doubt the men who served him. Elara heard none of it clearly from the chamber where they kept her chained, but she felt the tension in the walls. Wolves knew when a house was afraid. They knew when danger had not left, only hidden itself better. She was sitting on the floor, her wrists raw beneath iron cuffs, when a sound sliced through the silence. Small, smothered. A child's cry. Elara went still. The guards outside her door kept talking in low voices, unaware. The cry came again, faint and broken, from somewhere behind the eastern wall. Elara's breath stopped. "Nia," she whispered. The chain around her wrist pulled tight as she lunged to her feet. "Open the door!" she called. No answer. "Open it, now!" One guard looked through the barred window with a sneer. "The king didn't order comfort." Elara's eyes shifted, gold bleeding into green. "There's a child in the wall." The guard's hand went to his sword. "Step back." Another cry came, weaker this time, and whatever patience remained in Elara shattered. She seized the chain in both hands and pulled. Iron groaned against stone. The guards shouted. She pulled again, shoulders trembling, blood sliding from her wrists. The bolt tore from the floor with a crack that shook the room. By the time the door burst open, Elara was already at the wall, dragging the loose chain behind her like a dead thing. "Touch her, and I will forget I am trying not to kill anyone," she said. 3 spears lowered toward her. Then Kaylin's voice cut through the hall. "Stand down!" The guards froze. Kaylin strode in wearing no crown, only a dark tunic hastily belted, his face hard from lack of sleep. "All of you, back! Your Majesty, she broke—" "I saw what she broke," he said. "Now let me see what she heard." Elara pressed her ear to the wall, then struck the panel beside an old tapestry. The wood split inward, revealing a narrow servant's passage choked with dust. A tiny figure crouched inside, knees to chest, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with grime. Nia blinked into the torchlight as if expecting death. Then she saw Elara. "You found me," the child sobbed. Elara reached for her, and Nia crawled into her arms so fiercely that the broken chain clattered across the floor. "I told you not to follow," Elara murmured, but her voice broke around the words. Nia buried her face in Elara's shoulder. Kaylin stared at the child, at the way Elara curved her body around her without thinking, as if her own wounds no longer existed. "Who is she?" he asked quietly. Elara's jaw tightened. "No one." Nia lifted her head. "That's not true." "Nia," Elara warned. "No." The child looked at Kaylin with frightened defiance. "Your hunters killed my mother." The corridor seemed to empty of air. One guard shifted. Kaylin did not move. "Tell me," he said. Elara pulled Nia closer. "She is a child. She owes you nothing." "And I owe her the chance to be heard," Kaylin answered, though the words came as if they cost him. Nia's hands twisted in Elara's torn sleeve. "They said Mama had rogue blood. She didn't. She made medicine. She helped people when fever came. The hunters came at night. Mama told me to hide under the floor. She said not to breathe. I heard her beg them. I heard one laugh." Her voice thinned. "Elara came back for me when everyone else ran." Elara closed her eyes. "Enough." Kaylin's gaze sharpened. "Why stop her?" "Because the moment she becomes useful to you, men like Varric will make her dangerous to everyone else." "I am not Varric." "Then prove it before you ask a child to bleed for your conscience." The words struck harder because they were not shouted. Kaylin turned toward the gathering court officials, now crowding the hall in robes and jeweled collars, drawn by the noise like vultures to a battlefield. Varric stood among them, face pale with anger barely held in place. "This child," Kaylin said, his voice carrying down the corridor, "is under my personal protection. Anyone who questions her, moves her, threatens her, or speaks her name outside these walls without my leave will answer to me." A murmur broke through the crowd. Varric stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, the word of a terrified orphan cannot be allowed to stain the crown's justice." Kaylin looked at him. "Then the crown's justice should not be so easily stained." Varric's mouth closed, but his eyes went cold. Later, when the court had been forced away, and Nia had finally fallen asleep in a guarded chamber near the king's own rooms, Kaylin found Elara standing at the balcony overlooking the moonlit courtyard. They had returned her chains, but not to the floor. A compromise. a cowardice. He knew she knew it. My father used to say mercy was a luxury kings could not afford, he said. Elara did not turn. Then your father made you poor in the only way that matters. For a long moment, only the night answered. Kaelin stepped beside her, leaving enough space that she would not feel cornered. You speak of mercy as if it saved you. No, she said. I speak of it as if I know what happens when no one offers it. He looked at her then, not at the prisoner, not at the woman who had killed his hunters, but at the person beneath all the stories. You are not what they told me. Elara gave a small, tired laugh. Neither are you. That does not make either of us safe. Something quiet passed between them. Not softness, not yet, but recognition. Two people raised to survive different kinds of cages, standing close enough to see the bars. Then a scream tore through the corridor. Elara moved before Kaelin could breathe. They reached Nai's chamber as a masked figure lifted a blade above the child's bed. Elara struck him from the side, smashing him into the wall. Another shadow lunged from behind the door, not at Naya, but at Kaelin. The blade flashed toward his ribs. Elara stepped between them. Steel entered flesh with a sound too small for the damage it did. Kaelin caught her as she fell, his hands instantly red. Naya screamed her name. Elara's fingers clutched his sleeve, her face drained of color, but her eyes stayed on his. Now, do you believe me? She whispered. Kaelin bent over her, all the power of his throne useless against the blood spreading across the floor. I believed you, he said, voice breaking in a way no king's voice should break. Before I was brave enough to say it. And as the guards dragged the assassin into the torchlight, Kaelin saw the royal seal hidden beneath the man's collar. Her blood on the palace floor gave Kaelin a truth no counsel could soften. Someone close to his throne wanted the child dead. Elara woke to the smell of crushed mint, iron, and clean linen, and the first thing she felt was not pain. It was restraint. Leather straps crossed her wrists, soft enough not to bruise, firm enough to tell her exactly what had been taken from her. Her eyes snapped open. A healer leaned over her with a silver needle in hand, and the room exploded into motion when Elara tried to rise. Untie me, she rasped. Now. The healer stepped back, pale. Lady Elara, you were bleeding through the lung. His Majesty ordered. I did not ask what he ordered. Her voice cracked, but it did not weaken. I said, untie me. The door opened before the healer could answer. Kaelin stood there, without crown or cloak, his shirt still stained at the cuffs where her blood had dried into the seams. For one breath, neither of them moved. Then Elara pulled against the straps again, and his jaw tightened. Leave us, he said. The healers obeyed too quickly, grateful to escape the storm. When the door closed, Elara looked at him as if he were the blade that had entered her side. You had them bind me. Kaelin came closer, slowly, as one might approach a wounded wolf with every right to bite. You were fighting the treatment. I was unconscious. You woke twice. You tore out the stitches once. Then let me tear them out. They are mine. His eyes flickered, and for a moment she saw the man beneath the king, exhausted and afraid, holding his control together with both hands. You would have died. That does not give you the right to make my body a room you can lock. He stopped beside the bed. The anger in him did not rise to meet hers. It folded inward, becoming something heavier. I have spent my life being told that protection means command, he said quietly. That if I see danger, I must seize the thing at risk and hold it until the danger passes. Elara's laugh was dry and painful. A pretty way to describe a cage. Yes, he said. Just that. No defense, no royal pride rushing in to save him. Elara stared at him, and the silence between them changed shape. "Do not confuse saving my life with owning it," she said. Kalen lowered his gaze to the straps, then reached for the buckles himself. His fingers were careful, almost reverent, as he freed one wrist and then the other. "Then teach me how to stand beside you, without becoming another cage." Elara did not answer at once. She rubbed the feeling back into her wrists, watching him as if she were trying to decide whether those words were strategy or surrender. "Start," she said, "by asking before you touch what is mine." Kalen nodded. "May I help you sit up?" It was such a small question. It should not have mattered, but Elara's throat tightened anyway. "Yes," she said, and when his hand came beneath her shoulder, he moved only as far as she allowed. By sunset, the king broke another silence. He convened a closed tribunal in the inner hall, not the grand court where nobles performed outrage for one another, but the old stone chamber beneath the eastern tower, where oaths were carved into the walls in a language older than the crown. Elara entered with one hand pressed to her bandaged ribs, Nia close beside her, and Captain Soren behind them like a shadow that had chosen its side. Merrick was brought in under guard. Lord Varric came willingly, his face carved from grief and discipline. Kalen sat at the head of the chamber, but he did not begin with a decree. He looked at Merrick and said, "Speak the order you were given." Merrick's eyes darted toward Varric. "Your Majesty, I serve the crown." "Then serving it should not prevent you from telling it the truth." Merrick swallowed. The chains at his wrists gave a small, ugly sound. "We were told to search the northern settlements for rogue blood. If we found it, we were to remove the threat." Soren's voice cut through the hall. "Define remove." Merrick closed his eyes. "Leave no witnesses." Nia made a sound so small, it almost disappeared into the stone. Elara reached for her hand. Kalen leaned forward, his face dangerously still. "Even children." Merrick's silence answered before his mouth did. "Even children," he whispered. No one spoke. The walls seemed to hold their breath. Then Varric stepped forward. "Do you want me to deny it?" he asked. "I won't." Kalen looked at the man who had advised his father, trained his soldiers, and stood at his right hand through 3 winters of war. "Why?" Varric's eyes were not wild. That made it worse. They were clear and ruined. "Because I remember what mercy cost me. Your father waited. He debated. He sent envoys to raiders who had already chosen blood. By the time we rode north, my mate was opened from throat to belly, and my son had died before he ever took a breath." His voice did not break, but something in the room did. "Every child I spared in weakness became another grave waiting to happen." Elara's fingers tightened around Nia's. She looked at Varric, not with pity, not with hatred, but with a sorrow that refused to excuse him. "Then you made strangers pay for the dead you could not save." Varric turned to her slowly. "And you think your mercy will save her?" His gaze dropped to Nia. "You think the world will spare that child because you bled for her?" "No," Elara said. "I think if I become you to protect her, then the people who killed your family win twice." Kalen stood. The movement was quiet, but every guard in the chamber straightened. "Until full judgment is rendered, the hunters who carried out these orders are stripped of royal honor. Their names will not be sung in the barracks. Their families will receive no glory for murder dressed as service." A murmur of shock moved through the men at the doors. Kalen did not look away from Varric. "And you are removed from command authority, effective now." Varric's mouth hardened. "You would shame loyal dead for a rogue woman? I would shame any dead who obeyed an order to slaughter children." The words landed like a blade laid flat on stone. And I would shame myself if I let the crown hide behind them. The backlash began before the night cooled. In corridors where servants once lowered their eyes to Elara out of fear, nobles now stared openly with sharpened contempt. A lady in blue silk whispered, "She has bewitched him," just loudly enough to be heard. 2 soldiers at the infirmary doors did not salute when Elara passed. Soren saw it. His hand moved to his sword. Elara stopped him with a glance. "No," she said. "Let them show me what truth costs." Later, when Nia finally slept, curled beneath a blanket too fine for a child who still flinched at footsteps, Soren found Elara beside the narrow window. Moonlight silvered the bandage beneath her gown. "There is a service gate below the west kitchens," he said. "1 guard. Mine. If you want to go, I can have horses ready before dawn." Elara did not turn. Beyond the glass, the palace grounds stretched white and cold, beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. Why offer? Because staying here may kill you. Leaving may kill her. Soren was quiet. "The king will try to protect the child. Trying is not the same as standing when the room turns against you." "And you believe he will?" Elara looked toward the closed door, toward the halls where Kaelin had just made enemies out of men who once praised him. "I believe he already did." Soren studied her for a long moment. "Is that loyalty?" "No," she said softly. "Not yet." Her hand rested against the window frame, steady despite the pain. "It is a choice. Mine." When dawn came, Elara did not take the hidden gate. She walked into the palace hall with Nia at her side and the king's enemies watching from every archway. She was still wounded, still unwelcome, still unbowed. By choosing to remain in the palace, Elara stopped being a prisoner of the king and became a threat to every lie the kingdom had survived on. The storm came after midnight, hard and sudden, as if the sky itself had grown tired of holding its silence. Rain struck the palace windows like thrown stones. Torches hissed in the courtyards. Somewhere below, a bell rang once, then stopped before the second toll could escape. Elara woke before the shouting began. She had learned, long ago, that danger had a sound before it had a shape. Beside her, Nia sat up in the narrow bed, eyes wide, one hand already clutching the blanket to her chest. "Is it them?" the girl whispered. Elara crossed the room and pressed 2 fingers to the door. Footsteps. Too many. Not guards on patrol. Men running with purpose. "Stay behind me," Elara said. The door opened before Nia could answer. Kaelin stood there, rain in his hair, though he had not been outside, his shirt half-laced, a sword bare in his hand. Behind him, Soren was giving orders to 2 loyal guards. "Barracks men have taken the outer barracks," Kaelin said. "They're claiming I've been corrupted by rogue blood. They're coming for Nia." Nia made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a breath. Alara's face did not change, but the room seemed to sharpen around her. "Of course they are," she said. "A child is easier to hold up than the truth." Kaelin looked at her bandaged side, then at the blade lying on the table near her reach. "There is a passage behind the hearth in my chambers. It leads below the east tower. You and Nia can hide there until this is over." Elara stared at him. The thunder rolled so close that the glass trembled in its frame. "If I let them turn me into the shadow they fear," she said, "they win." Kaelin's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the old instinct to protect what mattered by locking it away. For a heartbeat, Elara thought he would command her. The Alpha King, the man every wolf in the palace had been trained to obey. Instead, he picked up the blade from the table and held it out to her, hilt first. "Then walk where they can see you." Something passed between them in that small exchange. Not softness, not surrender. Trust, stripped of decoration. Elara took the weapon. "Keep Nia close," she told him. "No," Nia said, her voice shaking but clear. "I stay with you." Elara turned. "This is not courage you need to prove." "I know," Nia swallowed. "But if they are hunting me, I don't want to be carried like proof. I want to stand like a person." Kaelin looked at the child, and the pain in his eyes was almost too human for a king. "Then you stand between us," he said, "not in front." The palace became a forest after that. Halls that had once smelled of beeswax and old stone filled with smoke, wet leather, and fear. Men moved through the corridors in hunting bands, calling to one another with the clipped signals of trained soldiers. Only this time, their prey was not a woman in a ravine with blood on her hands. It was the truth inside their own walls. At the West Gallery, 3 soldiers blocked their path. Elara recognized one by the scar across his mouth. He had been there years ago when a border mother begged for her son's life. He recognized Elara, too. His face went pale beneath the torchlight. "Murderer," he breathed. Elara lifted her blade. "You remember the dead only when they stand in front of you?" He lunged first. She moved under his strike, caught his wrist, and drove the pommel into his throat, hard enough to drop him without opening him. The second man came at her from the side. Soren intercepted him, steel ringing steel. The third froze when Kaelin stepped into the torchlight. "Stand down," Kaelin ordered. The soldier's grip shook. "Lord Varric says, you've betrayed the crown." Kaelin's voice was low. "I am the crown." "Not if you let her poison it." The man raised his sword toward Elara, and she could have killed him. Everyone saw it. The angle was clean, his throat was exposed. Instead, when he attacked, she turned the blade, cut across his forearm, and kicked his knee from under him. He fell screaming. Alive. Elara stood over him, breathing hard. "Yield." The soldier stared up at her, stunned by mercy he had never shown. "Yield," she said again. His sword clattered to the floor. That sound carried farther than his scream. By the time they reached the throne hall, the storm had broken one of the high windows. Rain blew across the marble, washing old banners against the walls. Varric stood below the throne, with 6 men around him, his white hair wet at the temples, his sword drawn, but steady. He looked not like a villain from a child's tale, but like a man who had built his entire life around one terrible certainty and could not survive its collapse. "Look at you," he said to Kaelin. "The last true alpha of your line, reduced to guarding a rogue woman and a half-blood child." Kaelin stepped forward. "You ordered an uprising in my home. I defended your kingdom when you would not." Varric's gaze cut to Elara. "She killed your hunters. She shamed your authority. And you brought her to your palace like a queen." Elara felt the room turn toward her, toward the old story they had been fed. Monster, temptation, ruin. Kaelin did not look away from Varric. "Those hunters slaughtered families under royal colors. They kept fear outside our walls." "No," Kaelin said. "They planted it inside them." Varric's face twisted. "You love one woman more than your kingdom." Kaelin's answer came quiet, and because it was quiet, it struck harder. "No. I finally learned the difference between ruling a kingdom and owning its fear." Varric attacked. The sound of their blades filled the hall, brutal and bright. This was not a graceful duel sung about by minstrels. It was grief in motion. Varric fought like a father whose son had become a stranger. Kaelin fought like a king, trying not to become the monster who raised him. Twice Kaelin had the opening to end it. Twice he hesitated. Varric saw it. He drove his dagger beneath Kaelin's guard and cut deep across his ribs. Kaelin staggered. Nia cried out. Elara moved, but Varric was already turning, not toward the king, but toward the girl. "Proof," he snarled. "All of this ends with proof." Nia did not run. She stood with rain blowing across her face and whispered, "I am not your enemy." For one breath, Varric stopped. Not because he believed her, because somewhere beneath the armor of his hatred, an old man heard a child. It was enough. Soren struck his sword from his hand. Elara crossed the distance and placed her blade against Varric's throat before he could reach for the fallen steel. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were not cruel. "Don't make me become what you needed me to be," she said. Varric looked at Kaelin bleeding on the marble, then at Naya, then at the woman he had spent years turning into a warning. His shoulders dropped. The fight left him like a storm passing out to sea. "Chain him," Kaelin said, one hand pressed to his side. No triumph entered his voice, only exhaustion, only the cost of mercy. As Soren's men took Varric away, the remaining rebels lowered their weapons one by one. Some looked at Elara with fear, some with shame, some with the first painful flicker of doubt. She did not ask them for anything, not apology, not gratitude. She simply wiped her blade clean, walked to Kaelin, and pressed her hand over his wound until his own covered hers. Morning came pale and cold over a palace that no longer knew what story to tell itself. The rebellion was over, but the harder battle remained, teaching a wounded kingdom how to see the woman it had been ordered to hate. The woman they had hunted became the measure by which the crown learned mercy, and nothing in the kingdom could return to what it had been. By midday, the great hall stood open beneath a ceiling scarred by smoke, its banners torn, its marble cracked where men had bled for lies they once called loyalty. Nobles gathered in uneasy silence along the walls. Soldiers stood with their hands empty, their swords surrendered in piles near the steps. And for the first time in living memory, the families from the border packs were invited through the palace doors without chains, without hoods, without being searched as if grief itself were a weapon. Mothers held their children close. Old men stared at the chandeliers as if beauty were something that might turn on them. Nia stood beside Merrick, one hand tucked inside his, her face pale but unhidden. Elara remained near the side of the dais, where a prisoner might have stood, because habit was hard to kill. Then Kaelin walked to the center of the ruined hall, with a bandage beneath his black coat and the weight of a kingdom in his eyes. He did not sit on the throne. He faced them all from the broken floor. "Today," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "I will not speak of victory. There was no victory here." A murmur moved through the nobles, but he did not let it grow. "Royal hunters died under my seal. Border children died under my silence. Innocent families were named traitors because men in power found it useful. Commander Varric carried my authority into private vengeance, and I allowed fear to make that possible." His jaw tightened. The confession cost him. Elara could see it in the way his fingers curled at his side, in the way every noble waited for weakness, and found instead a king who would not hide from his own failure. Kaelin lifted a parchment. "The names of the dead will be read. All of them. Not only those born within palace walls." The hall changed then, not loudly, but deeply. One soldier began to weep when the name of his brother was spoken. A border mother made no sound when the names of her 2 sons followed, but she pressed her fist to her mouth so hard her knuckles whitened. When the reading ended, Kaelin turned, and his gaze found Elara. She braced herself for private gratitude, for a quiet dismissal, for the familiar kindness of being sent away once she had served her purpose. Instead, he said before the entire court, "Elara, you were hunted under my law. You survived what my kingdom refused to see. Tell me what justice should look like." The hall went still. A noblewoman inhaled sharply, as though a king asking a border rogue for judgment had wounded her personally. Elara stepped forward slowly. She could feel every stare settle on her scars. "If you are asking me for mercy," she said, "do not make it symbolic. Kaelin did not look away. Then make it concrete. Her voice steadied. Every hunter order bearing the crown seal must be reviewed by a council that includes border witnesses, not only palace officers. No child is to be punished for bloodline, pack name, or the crimes of parents. And any commander who uses the king's mark for personal revenge is to be tried publicly, not protected quietly. A restless anger moved among the high-born benches. Lord Fenwick rose halfway. "Your Majesty, this gives savages authority over royal defense." Elara turned to him before Kaelin could answer. "No, it gives the hunted a voice in deciding whether the hunt was lawful." The silence that followed was sharper than applause. Kaelin looked at Fenwick. "Sit down." The Lord sat, not because he agreed, because the old world had lost the certainty that made men like him powerful. Then Merrick moved. He crossed the hall with uneven steps until he reached Naya. In front of soldiers who had once mocked her, in front of nobles who had pretended not to see her fear, he lowered himself to one knee. "I should have believed you sooner," he said, his voice rough. "I should have stood between you and the men who used my silence. I am sorry." Naya's lips trembled. "Do not kneel because you are ashamed," she whispered. "Kneel only if you mean to rise different." Merrick bowed his head. "Then I will rise different." Near the dais, Queen Mother Isolde stepped forward with a cloak folded over her arms, deep blue and lined in silver. Months ago, she would have looked at Elara as a threat to be managed. Now she approached without guards. Elara did not move away. Isolde placed the cloak around her shoulders, her hands careful, almost humble. "Royal protection," the Queen Mother said, loud enough for the hall to hear. "Not ownership, not forgiveness purchased cheaply. Protection." Elara touched the edge of the cloak. "Your son gave me his word before he gave me this." Isolde's gaze softened. "Then let the kingdom lend the order of things." Soldiers lowered their eyes as Elara passed them, not with contempt, not with fear of punishment, but with the difficult respect of men forced to understand the cost of their obedience. At the doors, border mothers entered more fully now, no longer held at the threshold. One little girl with tangled dark hair stared up at Elara's cloak and asked, "Does that mean they cannot take us anymore?" Elara crouched before her. "It means if they try, they answer to more than their own fear." The girl nodded solemnly, as if this were the first law she had ever trusted. Later, when the hall had emptied into murmurs and footsteps, Kaelin found Elara beneath the shattered archway that led to the outer gates. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Beyond the palace, the road stretched cold and bright, the same road where hunters had once dragged rogues in chains. "I can offer you a place beside me," Kaelin said quietly, "but not as repayment. Not because the court needs a symbol, and not because I think your pain can be honored by turning it into a crown." Elara looked at him. "Then what are you asking?" His eyes held hers, stripped of command. "I will not ask you to belong to me." Something in her chest loosened, not like surrender, but like a door opening from the inside. "Good," she said. "Ask me what I choose." Kaelin's breath caught, barely. Then he asked, "What do you choose, Elara?" She looked past him to the gates, where the border families waited, uncertain whether welcome could be real if it had arrived so late. She looked at the broken hall behind them, at the throne she had once believed could only devour people like her. Then she looked back at the man who had learned that power without humility was only another kind of hunger. "I choose to stay," she said. "Not because fate tied me to you, not because mercy made me soft. I choose it because you changed when it cost you something. And because I want to see what this kingdom becomes when it is no longer built on fear." Kaelin did not take her hand until she offered it. When their fingers met, No horn sounded, no prophecy woke, no magic crowned the moment. The gates opened. The families walked in. And Elara walked beside Kaelin toward the road that had once promised chains, her shoulders straight beneath the cloak, her gaze fixed forward. She did not look back at the throne behind her. The future was no longer something she had to steal in order to survive. And when the kingdom saw her standing beside its king, it saw neither captive, nor prize, nor fated queen, but the woman whose choices had forced power itself to bow and learn another shape.